Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged podcast. This week's episode was technically challenging. Let me put it like that. We had a lot of trouble for whatever reason. I don't even know what it is. It wasn't my wireless or internet or hardwired internet. It wasn't my guests. It was just, I don't know what it was. So we had to compromise and use 4G phones, and it's crazy. But it was definitely worth it because our guest today has been on the show before quite a few times, and she is an extraordinary knowledgeable spokesperson about the energy transition. I'm talking about Emma Pinchbeck, who is, and I want to make sure I get her title correct, I'm just checking, Chief Executive of Energy UK. And this is a position she's held since 2020. I actually met Emma long before that, and she was on the Fully Charged podcast long before that. And she's had many fascinating roles. And she's an expert in whole economy decarbonisation and the energy transition. That is the really fascinating thing with Emma. Her grasp of what is going on in this country, in Europe in general, and in the globe is really sensational. And this is I'm so glad we managed to do it against all the odds to record this episode, because it is, really important topics that we get into. We do get into the weeds, but we get into the really interesting, granular transition that's going on now. And it just puts to bed quite a lot of the sort of really armchair engineer nonsense that I get sent about renewables and the impact and all the rest of it. So it is really good to have someone who genuinely understands the whole industry. Emma represents the entire energy industry: nuclear, gas, coal, wind, solar, tidal, everything, pumped storage, battery. It's not any one specific topic. So she really understands how all those very difficult and different systems work together. And it's not always easy, as you will discover. So it's a fascinating conversation. I really hope you enjoy it. We're going to get Emma back on the podcast again in the future, because she's got such amazing insights, and also at our live shows in the UK, because she is a legendary communicator. It's a really complicated topic, and she makes it, you kind of walk away going, okay, I sort of get what's going on. And if you've got a brain like mine, data goes in really effectively, comes out quite effectively too. So retaining that data is a struggle. But Emma Pinchbeck is very capable of retaining that data and communicating it at a later point. So that is really good. While I'm recording this, she's actually basically next to number 10 Downing Street in the UK, talking to the government about energy policy. She's at that kind of level. So we're very grateful to have her here. So please welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast, Emma Pinchbeck. Emma, thank you so much for joining us again. Well past the time we need to do a catch-up on the energy systems and the energy transition in the UK. Because that's one of the things I just want to make that point, because I think it's important, is that our audience is very global, not just UK. It's about a third of our audience is in the UK, the rest is overseas. But I think what's happening here is very, it's very illustrative of what's happening around the world. And am I right in thinking there was a time when we could hold our heads up proudly and say, we're doing really well in this country with renewables and the transition to a low carbon energy system?
Yeah, there was a bit there where we could be really smug. That's for sure. Yeah, and you know what? Still, I think there have been some world leading things in the UK. First country probably to phase out coal from our power system. And given that we are the home of the old industrial revolution here, I think that's a really extraordinary story about energy transition. First country in the world really to demonstrate this idea of decoupling, which is that you can have a growing economy. Maybe less so at this particular moment, but generally a growing economy and decarbonise. And so we demonstrated that you can break the link between needing to invest in an energy transition and the growth of your traditional economy. And then, I mean, just the share of renewables in our generation mix is still pretty extraordinary. We had wind up at 60% of the mix, just wind, not clean power, so not including our nukes and other solar and other renewables like hydro. It's just been an incredible shift in power. And I think because we've got a customer base that can do things like buy them, EVs are going to fly here as well. So we have been a test bed for some of the bits of the transition where your question implied we were no longer in the lead. And I think what's happened is we were early movers on certainly the markets and scaling up renewables, but other countries are catching up. And after the war in Ukraine, other countries are not just catching up, they're now massively outspending us.
Right.
And so, our wind market was at one point the biggest in the world for offshore and now is fourth or fifth.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow, that's really
wow. Because China and other countries have kind of flown ahead, but also, the US has got a pipeline that's as big of our pipeline that they've built up in a year. It's taken us 10 years to get there. So they're just kind of skipping to the bit that we're at. And so the big question for the government is whether they want to continue to lead the race and which bits of the transition they expect to lead as we kind of go into a world where renewables are incumbent. That's my job to help them sort out. But yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think is extraordinary about your role is that correct me, and I'm sure you will, but it feels like you are a fairly critical conduit between industry and government. And in fact, sometimes between industry and the public. I mean, you're on national television in the UK just the other night.
Yeah.
That seems to be, and that's the role. I mean, would you say that is a sort of base role of Energy UK? Is that?
Yeah, it's absolutely our job. We're the sort of translator in chief between all of those different views of what our market does, because politicians, the energy is an essential service that underpins the economy. They want their constituents to have cheap power. If energy goes wrong, it's on the front page of the newspapers. It's a kind of essential commodity, and therefore it's highly political, and they want things out of it. So they say it's highly regulated, very politicized market. Equally, it's a big industrial section of the economy, big economic opportunity, billions and billions and billions of pounds in the global market and in the industry. So it's also, industry speaks this language of commerce and rates of return and kind of long-term investment, and they understand the energy transition because they understand long-term risk and how power prices work and what the UK is doing relative to Germany or to the US. So there's the kind of industrial bit of it. And then there's the public, and the public are massively interested in tackling climate change. They're hugely interested in new technologies. They've all got lots of misconceptions or ideas about how energy works. And my job is to try to, I suppose, translate the motives, the messages, the ways of thinking about this industry or this kind of complex market or this social good to all of those different audiences. And we're obviously in the middle of the biggest energy transition for 100 years. So it's a great time.
Huge. Yes.
Yeah. It's never not interesting,
No. I mean, I think that is one of the kind of things from the point of view of the people who operate the national grid, the people who are in the generating sector, the people in the distribution sector. Whenever I meet them at various weird events that I sometimes end up with you at the same times, but what's noticeable is the excitement, enthusiasm, a realistic grasp of the challenges. It's not that they're not in a fancy world, but the possibilities are extraordinary.
Yeah.
Along with the challenges, which are monstrously huge.
Yeah.
But there is some sort of excitement because there is the possibility of doing something completely different.
Yeah, all of that is right. They are a really delightful bunch of nerds, the energy sector, and it's smart people grappling with quite complex technical challenges. Like I spent a lot of my life talking about things like, I don't know, negative pricing or trying to think of something really dull, planning reform or like
grid connections for new projects.
Yeah, grid connections for new projects. And like that goes down to like the last mile of the grid connection, or like fuses, which I've spent a lot of time talking about this week. It's so technocratic. It is so dull. Some of the stuff we talk about,
Yeah.
but you're doing something that is unbelievably exciting, and I really enjoy the intellectual challenge and the kind of complexity of it. And of course, most of my job is the technology, is the investment, is the jobs and the skills, and actually how do you build this stuff. But there's also that extra complex social layer of people have very strong feelings about this whole world. They care about the environment, they care about infrastructure. It's about human behavior as well as about nuts and bolts, and it's just fascinating. And then you step back from it and you look at 44 degrees of heat in Europe, and you also can see the massive moral imperative and I suppose the enthusiasm for doing something good. And both of those all of that exists in my sector. Just because the business doesn't mean that most of the people that I talk to, as you've met them, aren't that mix of like really engineering heavy nerdishness and like passionately excited about the world they could be creating. So yeah.
But it's also, I mean, I think it's one of those things that it's no one's fault. It's just the way things are, that we are hearing about incredibly high temperatures in southern Europe at the moment, and which is understandable because that's our media covers that. We're not hearing about unspeakably high temperatures in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, the weather temperatures have gone off the, all-time records are being broken, but we don't know about that. So that's sort of, which is what's going to affect us. I mean, I shouldn't go off on a tangent, but people aren't going to want to live there. They're going to want to leave and head north, which, strangely enough, they seem to be doing.
Yeah, we talk about this. It's a very interconnected world, and I suppose, not to go off at a tangent too, but my background is, environmental engineering, much more climate change focused work. And I think in a nutshell, the things that were difficult about articulating what to do on climate change were, it felt like it was an over there problem, not an over here problem. So actually, for me, it's not bad that Europeans and Western audiences are seeing that, actually, it could be 44 degrees here too. I think it's coming home to people that it's everyone and it's interconnected. Your point about what does the media struggle to do? The media struggles to link this stuff up. Yeah. So, our ecological systems underpin human progress, and human civilization, and the way we all think, feel, live, behave. And I think the media finds it hard to link climate change with, say, the stories on migration.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, the recent energy crisis in Ukraine with the energy transition and what we can do about it. We struggle to link the big to the small, the kind of stuff that's over there to our everyday experience. And, that might change as we get better at articulating all the complexity of this. But I suppose that's one of my jobs too. My specific job right now is like explaining to politicians why renewables aren't just about climate change. They are also about the energy crisis we've just been through. They are also about energy security. They are a bog standard energy technology that we just think is going to be cheaper and better.
Yeah. I mean, that is because that's one of the key points I wanted to ask you about, because that's always been my argument. It's, I would love to live in a society where we're not sending, literally billions of pounds out of our economy to pay for oil and gas, which is what we do at the moment. And you can be all high and mighty and say, I don't want to support, corrupt regimes, but we're sending a lot of that to Norway, which, I just decided I hate Norwegians. And when I've made that joke to Norwegians, and they just smile and nod and then accept.
They are very nice people, the Norwegians.
They're lovely people, and they then willingly accept another 4 billion pounds into their economy from us to pay for oil and gas. But I mean, that's an argument is a pretty strong one. But more recently, I've felt, I think it's the variation of kickbacks, which I'm sure you experience this as well. But I might post something about, we've just touched 60% of all our generation from wind. And I have the background understanding that isn't every day.
No.
But I can't, you can't say that in a tweet or in a thread, as I now do. But the kickback from that was, well, it's not making our energy cheaper. Why if this is being produced, why am I paying so much on my electricity? Yeah. And that is a really difficult argument that I find hard to understand. And I've had it explained to me.
the easiest way to think about it is think about the entire way we've constructed energy over the last
What's that?
100 years of coal. Yeah, 150 years of coal, or, if this is more your thing, that certainly since the 1980s in oil and gas and kind of market liberalisation, basically the markets, the surrounding infrastructure, the way that energy behaves both locally here in the UK and globally has been driven by fossil fuels. And a gas-fired power station, you have the cost to build it and then you have the cost to run it, which is like buying the gas you need on the open market and then putting it in your power station. Those operational costs are less predictable. You have to kind of buy the gas ahead each quarter, or hedge ahead, or you have to buy the gas, you have to run it in your power plant, you have to build your power plant. Renewables, but once you've got it, very predictable because you can turn the thing on and off. And what I'm outlining here to you is it's very, very different from renewables, which have been historically more expensive to build because they're more complicated or new technology, but then basically provide free energy if they're generating. And then the if is about if you've got enough wind and you've got enough sun or whatever else. And yes, they're getting increasingly efficient. They're on most of the time now. They've got very high what we call load factors or increasing load factors. So they basically start turning over at very low wind speeds, and we're building them out at sea and all of that. But there is that thing about it's not the same as you can just turn the power station on and off necessarily. So then you need other things around them like storage, and they behave differently on the system, as well as the cost of financing being different. And then you don't have to buy a fuel. You don't have to buy oil and gas. However, they've been plugged into a market where the big variability has been the price of oil and gas. And so all of our markets basically operate around an assumption that a gas-fired power station is the marginal plant, like the plant that's going to switch on into your system if nothing else will. And it also operates around the idea that you have to buy a fuel. And so the electricity price follows the gas price.
Yeah.
So all you have to kind of think about is like, we haven't designed the market or come up with the market design for massive amounts of cheap electricity generated by renewables and how they behave in the market. And we can kind of imagine that world. The real complication is how and when you do the shift over without accidentally like messing everything up in the middle.
Yeah.
That was kind of, I don't know how that was about translating the problem, but we're in a very new world, and we've over the last 10 years basically plugged very new, novel, different technologies onto the existing system and onto the existing markets. And it hasn't been a problem, but now it's starting to be a bit creaky around the edges. And the next 10 years will be about figuring that out. And the 10 years after that should be brilliant new energy system, everything working.
Yes.
And we're in the what I call the crunchy bit of the transition. And I suppose the good news is people are starting to notice that we've got an absolute ton of renewables on the end of the system, and they're wanting to know when that changes, what that means for them in their homes.
Yeah.
The other thing to say is it has already changed your bill. You might not be experiencing prices as low as the renewable generators can get sometimes, but the presence of renewables on the system means we've imported less gas. Right. And because we've imported less gas, your bill is lower, because all of that gets passed on through the system. Yeah. So, we know that if we'd had fewer renewables on during the kind of gas price spike last winter, we'd have been in even more trouble.
We'd have
had to import more gas for generation.
Yeah. And I think what is true, and I've really felt this, and even with the most hostile anti-renewable vitriolic comments, people accept that the reason that electricity prices went up last winter was because of gas. They're saying this is your fancy windmills that we're paying for. No one is saying that. They know it's because of gas.
Time.
Yeah, because it was always blamed wind turbines and solar panels, and they don't work. And Jeremy Clarkson was right. And suddenly we don't get that now. Yeah,
I think it's really changed the dynamic in terms of how people think about energy security, and this sudden awareness that actually fossil is not that secure. And so we tend to talk about energy security as within our own market, within our own borders. You compared renewables with gas or renewables with nuclear in the kind of sense of could they turn on and off? Did we have enough capacity in country? And I think there's a sudden awareness that one of the bits of exposure in the market is you're having to buy gas or oil off foreign actors or off other countries. And even if we were producing here, the oil and gas market, producing more here, the oil and gas market is global and the price is set globally and really influenced by other actors. And there's very little that we can do in the UK, even as a producer, to control that price.
Yeah.
And I think that's really helped politicians think about the energy transition and clean and alternative generation and energy efficiency and this whole new world as something that's about energy security as well as climate change.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's also that I think there is a more general understanding of the interconnection between countries. The fact that we put in a huge new interconnector to Norway recently, and I think people have seen that map on the news of all those little
all the wires and boats. Yeah,
we're getting some electricity from France and from Denmark and from the Netherlands and from
Yeah, with the French nuclear fleet, we always have an eye on, for example, because they're hugely important to how our own market behaves here. So. Yeah, look, I'm not saying that the new world won't be an interconnected one, because for one thing, we're going to make a huge amount of electricity in the North Sea that we're going to want to export to the flipping Norwegians, amongst others. There you go. They'll be buying off us, Robert, at some point. But,
that'd be wonderful.
But I suppose there's the thing about picking your strategic partners and having distributed and diverse sources of energy, which people are now aware could be valuable. So if you have the ability to have onshore wind in this country, offshore wind in this country to generate power here, that is a tool in the box in a less geopolitically predictable world.
Yeah.
And then an interconnection is largely with the European continent or with clear allies. So there's also that strategic importance of our integration with that market. So anyway, it's just been a really fascinating shift for me. Indeed, we renamed the department, right? It's the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero now. So you can see that.
Isn't that extraordinary? Yeah.
But
the fact that it's energy security, because every now and then I say something when I do a public talk or something, and I go, I think what I'm saying might have some relevance and be right. And actually, there's one thing I've always harped on about is energy, because I've tried to appeal to the broadest possible audience.
Yeah.
So you can say to the lovely hippie audience in Stroud, man, it's all about like gentle energy that loves the world.
Yeah.
When you're somewhere else, you need to say this is about economics, and it's about energy security, and it's about not being invaded by Russia. All of those things. They might want to invade us to steal our wind power. That is possible.
Yeah, it is quite hard to pick up and run away with a wind turbine the size of the Shard, though. So it's just a brave new energy world, and I think the Ukraine crisis hasn't changed things so much as it's been like lighting the torch paper on some stuff where the bonfire was already ready to go. When I'm complaining about the UK falling on investment, that's relative. It's absolutely great that the US, that China, that the Europeans, that everyone is now competing for more and more investment into these alternative technologies. That's a great thing because the planet is on fire. So it's a very nationalistic point of view to be worried about our own market here, but we're all part of the same ecosystem. So I think we should all do our bit. I suppose that's the hippie way of looking at the UK.
Yes.
So, the Stroud Bay, Robert.
The only way is...
Listeners that don't know what Stroud is.
Yeah.
It's a lovely hippie town in Gloucestershire.
It's a lovely town, and you should just Google Stroud, Gloucestershire, and you'll sort of understand it. Because I live about 25 miles north of it, so I'm aware of Stroud. I go there quite often.
And it's where my family hail from, which is probably the way that I am.
Yeah. So maybe the historic influence of Stroud in 100 years' time there'll be people doing their PhD on
the home of Extinction Rebellion in the UK.
It is the home of Extinction Rebellion. You're right. But so here's another quick one, which is when you look back, and you've got to look back now, probably about 20 years, and I found some papers, and someone told me about this to look a while ago, the absolute cast iron opinion backed up by science and really clever people, that we could never, ever cope with more than 10% of renewables. It would crash the grid. And when you read it now and you go, my goodness, they weren't like wondering whether they were saying, you can't. And they're furious, sort of, it's just not going to work and don't be stupid. And we're now 60% plus. Other countries are, Denmark is often 120% when we're buying power from them. They got more than they know what to do with, So, but I mean, are we, that's presumably a part of the third 10-year period. I'm waiting for the first day where there's a report somewhere. Oh, no, you haven't frozen. You've got to keep reading. Yeah, sorry. Just bored. No, but there's one point. There's got to be a point where I get excited because I see a report in the newspaper. Britain was powered by 100% renewables for a 3-hour period on Tuesday, whatever it is. I mean, I don't know whether that's going to happen, but it can't really because we've got nuclear, and
that
can't really turn that
right?
off. Yeah, it's good. I'm very happy.
So the UK is not currently going for a 100% renewable system. We're going for a mix of technologies to make up a net zero system. And
so let me modify it. So Britain didn't burn any coal or gas. On Tuesday.
The national grid here have said that they will have periods of basically zero carbon power way before that, and they were talking about as early as 2025 for that, Robert. So we're into that sort of zone here, which is amazing and shows you that it's possible in other markets, right?
Yeah.
And the actual question in the UK is, I suppose, firstly, how fast we can get there.
Yeah.
There's 2 questions. Firstly, how fast we can get there, but secondly, just how far we'll be able to integrate renewables. So people talk about 75-80% renewables, and then the rest being a mix of nuclear and flexible technology. And by flexible technologies, they mean things like storage, carbon capture, hydrogen. What is it?
Yeah.
And actually, I'm worried about everything, but I'm marginally less worried about renewables here than I am worried about, are we thinking enough about how we decarbonise gas, if we think gas is going to be our flexibility to balance renewables, or are we worrying enough about like long duration storage, things like hydrogen or pumped hydro, or what is it that we're putting on with the renewables? We desperately need some thinking in that space, because we might get to your periods of zero carbon, but be able to run a 100% zero carbon grid all of the time. There's still a bit, getting very nervous about that. Yeah.
Right. Understandably, but what's going to be interesting is, like the other day, I didn't even notice it, but it was someone said something on Threads about that we're about to get to a negative price on British wholesale, UK wholesale electricity, and I did see it. And it was actually
every weekend,
more than I've ever seen before. Over the weekend, it was it was about 9p a kilowatt hour. You could all that stuff, but that could get to really huge level. If we say it can produce 75-80% on a normal day when it's all being consumed, there's the demand for it, then that could mean at night when there's not the demand for it and you have the capacity to produce gargantuan amounts of electricity, it is then all those other technologies you need. I mean, electric cars would play a very big part in that. Can you?
You need to, that is basically signalling a hell of a lot of excess energy on your system.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, on the one hand, great. On the other hand, terrible, because
it's a disaster.
Throwing energy in the wall.
Yeah.
And so it's called negative pricing periods, and there will be lots more of those with renewables. That's basically what they do, because when they turn on, and the amount that they generate when it's very windy, or when it's very sunny in that market. So there are 2 answers to that question. One, you could redesign the market so that it was more reflective of how renewables behave, but that is a risky, long-term, more complicated thing to do, because you're trying not to, in this period, this next 10 years, we're trying to build a shed ton of infrastructure here and around the rest of the world. What you absolutely don't want to do when you're trying to build a shed ton of infrastructure is freak out investors, and nothing freaks out investors like market changes. So we're having to do a kind of, how would you change the market, given that renewables are very different, without freaking out the investors who need to build the renewables. So there's a thing happening. That's one answer. the more interesting answer for fully charged viewers is the other thing you can do and crack on with immediately is trying to manage your grid flexibly so that you can manage excess generation by getting people to load shift and use it. So rewarding EV chargers for like charging at that time of day if they can.
Yeah.
Anyone with a heat pump or solar PV or batteries in their homes taking advantage
hot water,
of low prices.
Water heating, all those things, yeah.
Yeah, all of that. So that is why when we talk about the system being joined up from top to bottom and electric vehicles being as important as renewables, that's true because the price signals, the way these technologies behave really do reward the technologies on the other end of the market if we can get them all to work together. So you know, that is what the UK should be world leading in because we've got enough renewables to demonstrate it.
Yes.
And my personal view is figuring out how to make all of that work and getting the market right and getting the services right and your energy supplier offering you great things and low bills being passed on, figuring out that whole how does it flow through piece. That's what I think we should do. Got really good lawyers here.
Yeah.
They've got to be useful for something.
But then, okay, I know that because I've had this question asked personally, and that is, it was a really good point, and it was I felt stupid that I hadn't asked myself that because I was on a flexible tariff for a while.
Yeah,
prices went up, so I did get one night I got paid something like £2.13 for charging 2 electric cars, filling my battery, heating all the water I possibly could, and we've got a Tepio boiler, so a central heating system that's electric. So everything, we used gargantuan amounts of electricity and we got paid for it. But the really good question someone asked me, well, where did that money come from? I mean, we didn't get paid in cash. It was taken off my electricity bill, but someone has got to presumably supply that finance.
Those tariffs are offered by your suppliers. So your supplier looks at the market, packages up how they buy and sell energy, and at the top end of the market with those prices, suppliers are buying and selling the commodity that they need to sell to you.
Right.
And so their job as suppliers, like your food retailer or whoever else, is to kind of negotiate offers over a long period that they then try and pass on to their customers. And some of these suppliers are thinking, oh, people with electric vehicles could use different services or do different things or require different energy provision than other customers. And like, could we offer them a tariff? So they've designed a tariff for you, bought energy for that tariff, thought about the market. At the moment, most of those tariffs are loss leading for those suppliers because what we haven't yet done is in the big market literally join up that
all those things.
How that kind of renewables pricing works with them, what the consumer's experiencing. But what those suppliers are doing is A, taking a punt that will be the way the market goes, and B, trying to demonstrate that they work. So trying to demonstrate to, you know, the national grid or to the markets in general that people will reliably move their EVs back and there's a valuable service there, and then they can put a cost on it and then they can sell it. I don't know. I mean...
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, to be fair...
The business models on this are amazing. You know, that they've thought about that and worked out what they could buy and sell, basically. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, it's a very small number of people that are currently doing that in terms of the whole nation.
Yeah.
It's a very small percentage of people who are on those flexible tariffs because... There
is, though, another consequence of the crisis is we trialled something during the energy crisis in the UK last winter, which we'd been working on and doing in a small way for ages, where... We basically did a a load shifting signal to households.
Yes.
And so a lot of countries like France or Germany told factories to turn down when their grids were constrained because we didn't have as much Russian gas coming through and it was a bit tight last winter and prices were high and all that. So most countries turned down factories. In the UK, we did a bit of that, but mainly what we did is we asked loads of households to turn down. And you might have taken part in it.
I did, yeah.
So it wasn't all of the energy suppliers, but it was a good number of them. And what was amazing about it is two things. We got a huge response. We got over 2.5 gigawatts of response, which is about the size of a gas-fired power station, every time they put the call out. We were doing it here, and my husband was just like, I mean, we have 2 children. We did manage to feed them, but if he could have turned off the hob so I couldn't cook for them, he 100% would have done. Like, just running around, standing around.
A bit of cold pasta to chew on.
Yeah, you know. And I think in the end, I think what we did is cook ahead in the microwave. But I mean, it was an argument that the children needed supper, and that we shouldn't maybe sit in the dark. It was, it was really interesting watching people respond.
Yeah.
It didn't take much to get them to respond. So it's most suppliers did a small price signal. So you got paid, a couple of pence. And also the other thing that I think surprised National Grid is it was incredibly reliable. So it wasn't just it was 2.5 gigawatts or I think it was 2.8 gigawatts. It was that every time they did the call out, they got that back. Right. And for any system operator anywhere in the world, if you are asking things to turn down because you've got a kind of pressure on your system, the reliability of that turn down is critical, and people have been skeptical about whether like EVs or heat pumps or household demand would respond as predictably as a power station. And we've demonstrated in the UK that it does. So that's really fun. And that we're hoping that's going to become a permanent tool about how we manage the system here.
Yes.
Might have to persuade my husband that we do need to feed the kids in the long run. Like,
yeah,
they can't just have like cold dinner so that we get 2p back every time, doing our bit for the planet.
Yeah, that is another tin of cold tomato soup.
That's not the way to get them enthused about energy, is it?
But then, okay, so
very Victorian.
Yeah, no, it is very cruel. But then that one other factor that I'm trying to understand is, so say I am a person who operates offshore wind turbines.
Yeah.
And I get paid per megawatt hour of what I produce. When I'm being paid £2.14 for using a lot of electricity at night, are they still being paid? Because that's because their wind turbines are turning, so they're still being paid whatever rate they've accepted at that point.
Yeah, you're asking a helpfully quite complicated question. So there are lots of markets in energy. So most of the wind farms will have a contract for difference,
which is hard to. I've heard that term.
It's hard to explain, but basically the point of that contract is to smooth out some of the unpredictability in the price.
Right.
Partly because the prices are largely set by technologies that aren't renewables. We talked about the vagaries in the market. And if you're trying to build infrastructure, you're trying to build it, you need to know what the return on your investment is over 25 years. And energy markets are like, whoa! So the idea of the CFD is it just smooths out that uncertainty for investors. Right. You can get like pension funds or big investors to back it. And that money is cheaper than going to riskier kinds of investment, which helps bring down the cost of the technology, which is why governments have provided things like a CFD. And then the other thing about the contract for difference is it's competitive. So you don't get a guarantee, you get a guaranteed price, but you have to bid in what you think the cheapest price you can do your project for is, and it's kind of driven down prices. So they get that. But then how the prices behave in the markets, both intraday and intra-period on the wholesale markets, are about people selling power into those markets and then people buying it on the other end, your suppliers, and the prices there change. And so your energy supplier will buy enough energy ahead to hedge for your contract, now in the UK, 3 to 6 months ahead at least.
Right.
And they're all quite long-term markets, but they will also buy things in the day, to kind of supply. And that, reflects what's on the system. Yeah. And National Grid does the same thing. So they buy the power they think they need to run the system ahead and so on. And that's what critical things of wholesale markets. I'm massively oversimplifying.
It's incredibly complicated, basically.
It's very complicated. But I think that the message that fully charged listeners should take is we are in this period where the markets are changing and they're behaving differently because we've got different technologies on. And the fundamental discussion in most governments globally will be, how do you get the cheapest possible prices to customers, including passing on some of these troughs as renewables get cheap? How do you insulate consumers from the peak? If there's going to be more of this, what's the best possible way of passing on cheap renewables to customers, getting services to customers that benefit from renewables variability? How do you match them to EVs? All that good stuff. And how do you do that without killing off how do you move to that world without killing off infrastructure investors who like very boring, predictable, steady, don't change anything. Thank you very much. 25 years, market signals. And so one of these worlds is like market signals, and one of these worlds is like planned markets. And the answer we'll get to is probably somewhere in the middle, and then more towards this world eventually.
Yeah.
But it's hugely complicated and really good fun. As you can tell, I'm really into this stuff.
Yeah, that's correct.
Not to give you like an hour-long answer on it.
No, I love it. It's excellent. But then, okay, so I'm going to, because I will let you go soon, because I know, you've got to go to, I don't know if we can say where you're allowed. You've got, I know you've got to go.
No, yeah, I think we can say, because it's Chatham House. I'm not allowed to say what things.
Who's there and
I
what
think they will say that the meeting's happening. So I'm going off to the UK's Cabinet Office this afternoon with a whole bunch of the energy industry to talk about all of this, really, what energy looks like in the UK. And that's interesting because it's central government, our Cabinet Office. It's a bit like,
yes,
it's not just the energy department interested. They're interested in energy as the whole economy here.
It's essentially the core of the government. I mean, the way I describe it, because I've never been in there, but it's the building that's next door to where the Prime Minister lives in the UK.
Yeah,
essentially.
It's that.
It's a big building that 10 Downing Street is next to.
Yeah, it's like number 10, number 11, and then the other one no one talks about.
Yes. Yeah. But I had a question, one last question. Oh, yes. So intermittency, because this has been an amazing thing. So it's a constant, a form of criticism of renewables is intermittency. But then when you talk to engineers at the National Grid, they go, "We've dealt with an intermittency."
We've got to know how to do that.
Do you know how long it takes to fix a broken coal burning power plant? And I went, thinking an hour. No, 7 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
And same with the gas turbine. And, in fact, nuclear has generally proven to be more reliable in terms of length. But when it does need fixing, as we saw in France, it's quite a big problem. And it takes quite a long time. Yeah,
Energy UK is technology neutral. So we work on right across energy technologies. And although I come from a renewables background, anything I say to you about the various technologies have been signed off by a group of people that work all over the market, with the exception of oil and gas extraction. I do pretty much everything else. And so it's absolutely right. We've always dealt with stuff going on and off.
Yeah.
That's, we're used to managing the system at the way. The difference is renewables go on and off quicker. So,
all the time. Yeah.
So the way that we have to get the grid to respond has to be quicker, smarter, and more flexible. And then the other thing about intermittency, the line I use when I'm very tired is, very smart engineers over the last decade or 2 decades have worked out how to build skyscraper-sized infrastructure out at sea. Do you not think they watched a weather forecast? When we, in the process of working out what renewables were for over the last 30 years, do you not think that intermittency occurred to us in the energy sector? When I say a renewables-led system is cheaper, and I'm allowed to say that by, an industry that has gas and nuclear and coal and everything else in it, do you think that we haven't factored in the system costs of how we run those technologies or thought about how we might run the system? Of course we have. Of course we have. And so there are additional costs to managing renewables. We need other technologies with them. And, we've talked about it, batteries, flexible generation, other things. But what's changed over the last 10 years, I think, is that there is no one sensible in the energy sector that thinks that renewables won't be the incumbent in most systems internationally, because they are so cheap. And they're so cheap now that they're cheap even including the costs of managing the system. And we're also clearer about what the other technologies will be all over the system, from electric vehicles to kind of really big pumped hydro mountains. So there's more and more confidence of the share of the mix that they will take up. Right. And the National Grid here is very confident about running that system. They at one point said no upper limit on the renewables that they can accommodate. So, I suppose the note of caution, and we started this kind of saying the UK's fallen, is that world is possible. The industry can build it, but in a regulated market, you do need government to invest in it or set the markets up so we can do it. So we're having real trouble in the UK with planning and with our grid connections. And that is the same in most countries which are trying to build lots of energy infrastructure. We've got to build 7 to 10 times the amount of projects in the next 10 years as we built in the last 10.
Yeah. That's quite a big challenge.
You know, and you've seen the way the global economy is and the kind of competition for resources and all of that stuff we talked about in this call playing out. So selfishly here in the UK, but I think almost in every country trying to do this, there is a real need for clarity from government now and doing some really boring work on things like planning reform and grid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the example of that, which I think I might have mentioned on the Fully Charged podcast before, but I was at the energy conference. I think I last saw you at a few years ago, the Oxford one. I think I didn't see you.
Aurora. Yeah.
I can't remember the Aurora one, but
I mean, it was a couple of years ago. The second baby was like this big. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
But there was Greg Jackson was on one of the panels that I saw. So for people outside the UK, Greg Jackson's a bit of a figure. He's the founder and CEO of Octopus Energy, which is one of them, along with OVO and a few others, is one of the big Ecotricity. I was going to mention them all because they're all, I know.
But it's like talking about my children and asking me to favourite.
I'm not going to favourite. But what he said was really, I didn't realise this. So he's got planning permission, investment, technology to build a massive solar farm in Yorkshire with batteries that will produce electricity 24 hours a day. They're capable of doing that. And they've got everything. And the money, he said the easiest thing of doing that was getting the money to invest in it. The next easiest thing was getting planning permission, local council really up for it, blah, blah, blah. It's on a brownfield site. He's got to wait till 2036 to get a grid connection.
Yeah, I would imagine that's the case for most renewables projects, including some like the multi-billion-pound offshore wind projects in the UK. A long queue of projects waiting to connect and the way of managing that queue at the moment. But also it's just a scale thing. You know, our grid is highly regulated. The way we've done grid hasn't changed that much. I mean, it has, that's not fair. It is changing, but the speed of what we're trying to do, the scale of it means that in most countries, grid or planning are a big problem. And my favourite statistic in this space is to think that it takes about a year really to build a wind farm, at least onshore.
Yeah.
And it takes us 7 to 10 years in the UK to build one.
Right.
And a lot of that is like planning and environmental assessments and like blah, 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 and waiting for the government markets. And then you get your money in, you get the thing bill, you've got to get a grid connection. And like every stage of it is another 5 years. And we really have to work all of that out. And when I say that's the boring stuff government needs to do, that's you know, I suppose that's what I'm off to go and tell government this afternoon.
Yeah, and that isn't subsidies for wind farms. I mean, that's the thing, because the other one is always, it's only subsidised, you know.
It's not the money. Yeah, it's not the money. I mean,
it's not government money going to that. It is actually structural. It's lawyers.
It's lawyers. We've talked about lawyers a lot. It's lawyers. Yeah, we need lawyers. We need local planners. We need more resource in local authorities. It's about environmental assessors, and it's the folks who can do the bureaucracy. I suppose also arguably it's less bureaucracy. That would be helpful. And so things like in the UK, we're asking for offshore wind to be and renewables to be strategically significant infrastructure projects. So, and that just means that they can go through a faster planning route because we need them. Like we've done, you know, roads, for example, often sit in that box, or you know, new railway line. So, you know, recognizing energy infrastructure as a strategic asset. Yeah. But it is also about the capacity and the skilled people to do this. And we are not the only country facing those challenges. So, you know, I don't think that's a surprise.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Emma, it's annoyingly fascinating to talk to you.
Yeah.
It's only annoying. I just want to do it all the time, but I'm not going to. But I really desperately want you to come back on the show soon and appear at our live shows and all those things. You know,
I'd love to. The children are like fully weaned now, so neither of them technically need me anymore, which is hard.
Go off.
Yeah, and there's a real joy in it. I have been doing more things in person, Robert, so I'd love to come and see.
That'd be good. Well, you can leave your children at home in the dark and the cold with nothing to eat. With your husband, go fine. Yeah.
I shouldn't. I'm probably going to get into trouble for that line. I should be, because we had a few people when sometimes the cynicism of the internet just amazes me. When the DFS trial was launched and everyone was very excited about it, we had a little bit of, oh, this is so Victorian. You want people to turn their lights off and sit in the dark. So I should be clear that I am joking.
Not what you're doing. Yeah.
What's extraordinary is we managed to get that like load shifting behavior and people changing how they behaved. And my children went to bed warm and they went to bed fed. And and all we did was shift when we did the cooking, exactly. and then microwave it because that's more efficient. I promise you my husband didn't actually make a mistake.
No, I know. Yes,
so he would. I suppose the point is he would.
But that's very specific to your husband.
Yeah, that's very specific to my husband. Because the smart meter has broken his brain. Right.
Yes. Constantly checking how many kilowatt hours you've used that day.
Yeah, it's so weird because I'm the energy wonk in our house, but he's definitely the smart meter. I make him do all our bills and stuff just as sort of a live human experiment about how the energy transition is going.
Right, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for putting up with all the technical difficulties. Wasn't that amazing? Really hope you enjoyed that. It's just a joy to talk to her. She's brilliant. I really, really appreciate her. I don't know if I said it on the thing, but I said it to her. I'm a bit of a Pinchbeck fanboy, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I think she is really a truly extraordinary woman. I've met numerous amazing women in the British energy industry as a wide range of things. And it is interesting that there are increasing numbers of women working in that space because it's really important, I think, that they are. And I'm really pleased that someone of Emma's capacity and background and intelligence and insight is doing that job. Really important for all of us. That's all. I didn't even say subscribe at the beginning. It's kind of annoying always to be told that, but I'm just in case you haven't, please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show podcast. Tell your friends. And that's it. We'll see you next week. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.